Okay, good evening everyone. Thank you very much for coming to tonight's BTSYM lecture. Just before we get going with the presentations, just some usual housekeeping announcements. Can I please ask you to take a moment to check that your mobile phones and any other technical devices are turned off or put on silent. Also, please do not leave your bags or personal items unattended at any time, and in the event of a fire, the alarm will go off and we'll leave this meeting room by the emergency exits, so the two at the front and at the back. And if the alarm does go off, we'll make our way to Storey's Gate outside the ICU. In the event of any other emergency, you'll be informed by a member of the staff who will provide further instructions. So tonight we welcome 3 members from the Durand Group who have come to speak to us. Just to introduce our 3 speakers, so firstly is David Hedges, one of the first engineers to obtain a degree in computer electronics. In his early career, he was head of the telephone design at is now BT. He has been visiting the battlefields of Europe for over 30 years. He's been involved in discovering World War I tunnels and caves for about 22 years now, and joined the Durand Group in 1999, and is responsible for the electrical and electronic equipment. Secondly, we've got Bruce Simpson. He's worked on mining and tunnelling projects around the world, including Dubai Creek, Mo Irama iron ore mine and the Zambian copper belt, before joining the TML to work on the Channel Tunnel. This included gaining access to the original Channel Tunnel, the Beaumont Tunnel, and making safe for TML's tunnel boring machines to pass through. Finally, he's also been working for London Underground on the Jubilee Line extension, Green Park to Westminster, which was then the longest hand-dug tunnel in London for 35 years. And finally, we've got Alan Thomas. He's a 16-year member of the Durand Group, all-encompassing member from tea maker to clearing munitions in very poor conditions, now working for a commercial demining company as an EOD engineer. He's worked in many areas of the world, from the Far East, Middle East, and the battlefields of World War I and World War II in France and Belgium, but is based most of the time now in the UK and in London. So thank you very much all for coming, and if you would like to start your presentation. Thank you.
Oops. Right, well. Good evening, and what an auspicious place to give a lecture. I've been in many church halls with 6 old ladies that all fall asleep after half an hour, but this is one of the most prestigious, and we're certainly very pleased to be here. We've only got a little time. I could talk for hours on tunnelling. Perhaps you'll kindly invite us back another time. But I'll start 3, 5, 6,000 years ago. Unfortunately, young men have always been killing each other, and they still do so today. We never seem to manage to stop doing it. And throughout the history, well, if you study military history, as I've done for many years, it is frightening how these things tend to go in patterns, and it's frightening how today looks very similar to the build-up to the First World War in the Balkans and with Russia, etc. Hopefully it won't actually follow the pattern right through. But the characteristic of military fighting over 5,000 years, as a general rule, and we haven't got time to debate it, is that the advantage has always been on the attackers. They've got the choice of the ground, they've got the choice of the size of the force and the date. Particularly technology has tended to favour attacking over the centuries. And some simple examples of that: the bow and arrow has been superior to flesh, and which saw its culmination at the Battle of Azincourt, when the longbow was superior to the breastplates of the French knights. And of course, artillery has tended to be superior to battlements, which they're designed to knock down. And today, of course, offensive warfare is in the ascendancy with the ultimate of the nuclear deterrent. But for 2 very cruel years, and most probably the only time in military history, technology has favoured defence, and that was in 1914 and 1915. Now, if you look at the history of trenches, they've been around for centuries, and they've been very effective in many military campaigns, such that many a troop would actually not attack. They would revolt if they were asked to attack a frontal attack on trenches. and they've proved to be extremely effective defence. Now, the problem with a trench, of course, is you can get on a horse or you could even walk round it. So they had very limited advantage in previous battles. But with the First World War, after a little bit of a skirmish and an open warfare, we managed to dig, without any health and safety regs or project planning, a trench all the way from North Sea to Switzerland. And you imagine how many fit young men that took to do, which meant that you could not outflank the trench. You couldn't go around it on the North Sea, and you couldn't go through the Swiss mountains. So for once, trenches were an effective defence which could not be outflanked. And there was no technology with attackers that could defeat it. And that's why for 2 years there was stability on the Western Front, and the front hardly moved, despite the loss of, in Britain's case, 1,000 casualties a day. And if you hear casualties in the First World War, divide it by 3, 1 killed and 2 seriously wounded. So 1,000 casualties a day, 300 odd a day killed, trying to get through these trenches. And therefore it's a static warfare. And therefore with static warfare, inevitably you start going back to some pretty basic ideas, and that is to tunnel under and try and destroy the trench. So in many ways, that trench line, that First World War trench line is a castle stretched out right along the front. And therefore techniques that were developed in medieval times were reintroduced. And a lot of technology is called things like camouflage mines and fugas mines, terms that come from the Middle Ages. Now this slide was a sketch that should have been turned into a proper slide, and therefore you can see that no expense has been wasted on its preparation. But it's my favourite slide, and it shows the 3 types of tunnelling system underground in the First World War. It was compounded, actually, although the trenches are very powerful defences. The gods of war were capricious enough to make the underground strata 40-odd metres of chalk in France, not in Belgium, but in France, which meant any lusty young man with a bayonet or any solid piece of metal could dig himself a hole quite nicely. And therefore it favoured digging underground. And once you get down to 25 feet, you're impervious to shell fire. So you've only got to spend some time getting down that sort of depth, and you can have a reasonably cosy night. Now, the layman's view of soldiers is that they're standing in a frontline trench all day long, being bombed and gassed or whatever. But after first light, when you were checked that you were still there and hadn't run away, and in case the enemy attacked at first light, most soldiers would go down into underground caves and bunkers and rest for the day, and then you would work all night. So underground warfare became extremely important, underground sheltering. And the 3 types of system really are the fighting tunnels up here. They're down at about 90 to 95 feet, and that's the serious business. That goes down from the front line or the second line on an incline, sometimes a shaft, but on an incline, and then pushes out into no man's land, and you then explode a big mine under the enemy's trenches. And you have to go down to 90 feet, and you can't go any more because that's the water table. So the game is defined by the water table, and that's typically at 90 feet. And then you've got subways that are down at 25 feet, and they are impervious to shell fire, and that's the level that they build for subways, which are defined as tunnels that can take soldiers through in volumes. So they are a lot larger. They've worked out the height and the width for a soldier with a bayonet on his back, carrying his rifle, and they bring soldiers up to the front in relative safety. And then behind the lines, both sides discovered that in medieval times, going right back to Roman times, they dug great big caves underground to extract chalk for building. And you have to go down quite a way, not so much as the 100 foot, that's wrong, but about 80 foot, 70 foot, to get to chalk that you can shape into blocks and build the buildings of northern France. Having built a building, you leave a nice cave underground that typically has only got one entrance, which is basically like a well called a puits, and you come down there and fan out because the chalk is of equal quality everywhere you go. And once you've got a big enough cave, you can hide your family down there and your harvest and your cattle, because this part of northern France, going back hundreds of years, was a battleground between the Flemish-speaking people coming down from the Holy Roman Empire in Holland and Belgium, and French-speaking trying to push up north. So you would hide your family down in these caves, and since then, therefore, they've been regarded as a bit of a secret where they are, Souterraines as they're called, and the armies systematically looked for these because they were very handy for storing men and material underground just behind the front lines. The Germans themselves documented over 250 of these in the Arras area. Pressing the wrong button. So just a quick look at fighting tunnels. And this is a sketch at Vimy Ridge of the British side of the system. And the German front line is over here. There's about 100 yards. And this is the British front line there, and then the British second line here. And the idea is to try and get under the opposition's trench and then to blow a big mine. So these are mines that have gone off and the date on them that they went off. And then the front line moves backwards and forwards to accommodate the fact that there's now a new crater in no man's land. Now, when you first start fighting tunnels, you push out just straight out. There's a German system there. They're just coming straight out from their front line, trying to get under our front line to blow a crater. So they're quite primitive ones, really. And then once you get a bit more sophisticated, the British invented the concept of a lateral, which is this line here. So you would enter the system on the second line here, go down an incline, and then you would build a lateral right along at the water table level of 90 feet, so that the Germans could not come underneath. They would have to come on top of the lateral before they could attack the front line. And from that lateral, you then push out these little fighting tunnels out into no man's land at a distance between them such that you can hear. So there's no noise that can be created in this sort of area without one or other of these fighting tunnels hearing it. So once you've established a lateral, you're pretty impervious to any future attack. And what you would tend to do is each tunnelling company would dig their own lateral and keep it isolated from the next guy. So this one ends here. The next tunnelling company is starting here. So if the Germans were to break into that one, they couldn't run merry hell right throughout all the systems. So you can see it gets a very complex diagram. And these are the sort of mines that are going off. I'm sure a lot of you have seen this picture before. Very famous. This is 7:28 on the 1st of July, when the Hawthorn Crater goes off to kick off the Battle of the Somme, near a town called Somme and Beaumont Hamel. 40,000 pounds of explosives, about 200 Germans dying as that goes up in a stronghold called the Hawthorn Redoubt. And this is being filmed from the British front line. The world's first ever war film is being filmed by Geoffrey Malins. And that was the world's greatest explosion. And it was the world's greatest explosion for 8 minutes until they fired off, I keep pressing the wrong button, until they fired off this one, which is the Loch Nagar crater. And that went off at 7:28. Did I say 7:28 before? 7:20 before. This is 7:28, 8 minutes later. This is 60,000 pounds of ammonal, and it's been dug by the British under the German front line. As you can imagine, any surveyors amongst you, you can't exactly stand on the surface with your theodolite. You have to work out where you are by dead reckoning underground, and they actually got it a bit wrong, because the German front line is here, and that really should be pushed back another 50 yards or so. You can see the size of this crater judging from those trees up there. 60,000 pounds, the world's largest explosion, heard in London, even though this was on the Somme, and registered as an earthquake in Switzerland. So these caused a lot of problem. They were not, unfortunately, very decisive in terms of warfare. It wasn't the major weapon that was going to stop trench warfare, mainly because you are blowing under the German front line. Your front line is 200 yards away or whatever, and the Germans, being the most professional army the world had known to that point, were trained and very well adapted at running and seizing the lip of these craters. Now you can imagine that when this was first formed, the actual soft soil is absolutely higher than the trees there. And so once you've got on top of that with a machine gun, it actually gave you an advantage as the defenders rather than the attackers. And as a generality, tunnelling played no significant part in the war whatsoever, even though it employed 100,000 men underground on any one day. I bet you'd like to have those sort of resources digging Crossrail or something. But 100,000 men employed in tunnelling, but it never was a breakthrough weapon. Now, those mines went off, but unfortunately there's over 30 that are still live, British ones known to be live. Some of them were in public areas at Vimy Ridge and other public areas. There's no doubt a similar number of German ones around. And therefore, although the Detonators do an excellent job of clearing the surface munitions, which are still there in massive numbers in the First World War, and will continue to do so for the next 200 years, about 10 people are killed every year. Once a month, roughly, somebody's killed with First World War munitions, typically farmers. And those guys clear those. But the Detonators will not work underground, and so our role in the Durand Group is to go underground and defuse the mines that still exist. And therefore we got a pretty mixed bag of people to do that. There's two of them over here, very mixed bag. This is they were younger here than they are now here, but we've got a mixture of high quality tunnellers, bomb disposal experts, surveyors, civil engineers, and 6 archaeologists, 2 doctors, including the Queen's doctor, and various serving and still serving army personnel. So it's a pretty unique bunch of people, about 30 of us, all volunteers, don't get paid, unfortunately. Now, just coming back to this diagram in a little bit more detail, we push out these fighting tunnels into no man's land, and the idea is that when you get far enough over, if you're in the defensive mode, you put a little room at the end of them. There's an example of a little room, about the size of a 3rd bedroom, or for the posher ones amongst you, a 4th bedroom. And that's the only joke of the talk, actually. And you use that room for 2 things. One is to listen. If you're on the defensive, you're listening there for any approaching German tunnels. And if you need to blow a camouflage mine is a mine that's underground. It's not designed to break the surface. The surface break mines are called common mines, but the ones that just go from tunnel to tunnel are called camouflages, and they're typically 10,000 pounds of explosives. And so you would pack that little bedroom there with your ammonal bags and put your charges in. But of course, if you left your tunnel open, the blast would just come back through your own tunnel, and therefore you then have to pack this back here with rubble, chalk rubble, to stop the blast coming back into your tunnel. So what they did, they put these little kinks in the tunnel so that it would hit a solid wall at that point, and therefore you didn't have to put any more tamping in. And one of the advantages of these little kinks here is that if the Germans were breaking through up here, you could fire a pistol round that corner. And you didn't have to really aim, because if you just fired, it'd go ding, ding, ding all the way down the tunnel, and it might even hit somebody. Or you could throw a few grenades down. So you're protected by this corner. And you might ask those amongst you that are still awake, why are so many of them left-handed? Because you would have to then fire with a left-handed gun instead of a right-handed gun. You'd think they would all be right-handed to facilitate that. But one of the mysteries is that they're not all right-handed. Anyway, so that's a fighting tunnel. And these are the sort of tunnels then you get into. It's a judgment how big to make them. Now, the Australians like to swing a big a pickaxe, and really create bigger tunnels, but then you create a lot more spoil. And you've got to bring all that spoil out, totally out onto the surface. But if you make smaller ones, then they're obviously a lot more cramped to operate. This is a typical fighting tunnel, where it's only at sort of shoulder height. You have to walk along it bent over, which with my corporation now is not getting so easy. Now, this is a German tunnel at Vimy Ridge, and we wanted to get into this one because we believed that there was a German camouflage at the end of it. And I'll just show you this because it's not well made. We tend to think the Germans being very thorough, but they were a little bit desperate at this point in 1916 and coming into 17. So they built this tunnel, and as you can see, it's wobbling all over the place, and it's a bit crude up here. Although by putting a little bit of an arch on the top of a chalk tunnel, you do make it integrally a lot stronger as a general rule. But it's a bit too sharp there. But that's only the size of, it's hard to get the scale, but that's just a wire. That's only basically the size of your waist to your head. It's not big. And it's extremely spooky down there because men were known to have been killed down here, so we don't like going into that one. And this is the sort of thing we're going for. This is the aminal that's in bags, although in this case the bags are leaking ammonium nitrate out. Ammonium nitrate is the favoured material for terrorists. You can find the formula of how to make it on the internet quite readily, how to use it. Although a lot of my EOD colleagues say it's far easier to make a bomb than to make it go off, fortunately, and a lot of them fail. But this is not strictly a mine. This is a store for aminal at the back end of the system. But it does show how the bags were stacked up. They were called the bulk lifting agent, ammonium nitrate fertilizer. Now here Major Hawkins from the MOD is diffusing a mine. And what you have to do first of all is find the charge wires going back along the tunnel. Now if you can imagine, you've gone to all the effort to make a mine, and if you've just got one pair of wires and they break, then the whole thing is a waste, you've lost it. So typically you put 3 sets of cables into the charge, and this is the most dangerous part of diffusing the mine because one went off in the 1950s to lightning and created a massive crater in Belgium, and therefore you're very concerned that you don't induce a charge in that wire in case it triggers the primaries and sets the mine off. So what you tend to do is make the wires bare, put a short across the wires, minimise any chance of static getting into the wires. I mean, technically, it would be a very, very remote chance that would induce a charge, but you don't want to risk it. And then he can then follow the wires, find the centre of the stack. He's going for the primaries. The primaries are the most dangerous part. We've cleared all the tamping by this time. And once we've located the primary charge, which he's doing here, we go into a one-man risk, and everybody else goes on to the surface and has tea and things, leaving him alone, because if he's killed, that means there's just one guy killed. Unfortunately, we have lost one guy killed, unfortunately. He's now diffusing the mine, which essentially means that he's going for the primaries and taking them away from the bulk lifting agent, because that will not go off without a punch of a primary. And also, aminal is known to be poor if it gets 5% of water in it. So the stack is most probably not viable, but even so, and in handling these primaries and detonators, nobody's done any research on how these age over 100 years, and so carrying them away from the charge is his most dangerous time. Not enough to kill you, but enough to take your arm off if they went off. One day I'll press.
Just a small thing there is that those who have seen Steven Seagal and Diffusing saying, which wire shall I cut? Well, in this case, he was asking which wire to cut. Well, they're all black. The deteriorate, there's no colours. So basically, if you were cutting, you cut them all at the same time. So you don't have colours. It's red one, white one, which you just cut the lot.
If you've read Birdsong and seen the film, there's about 40 things wrong with the book that we've listed. One of them is he puts a trail of gunpowder like they do in Cowboys, and runs away and sets off the charge. Well, that aminal would not fire if you just set light to it. When you're down in these tunnels, you do find the most strange people. This was William Hague, who championed the book Birdsong. We took him down into the cave. He wasn't entirely happy, actually, into the tunnel, as you can see from his face. There's a very rude anecdote about this, but we can't tell you because we're live on air. But if you want to buy us a drink in the bar, we'll tell you that one. Anyway, just a quick look at Souterraines, which is my favourite subject because they're the size of churches and saves keeps bending down. And this is a souterrain we found 5 years ago or so. anybody that's been to Arras, the first one I found was that the Wellington Cave, which is now open to the public, so do go along and see that. But this one is to the north of Arras. It's called Maison Blanche, and this was dug in medieval time. You can see that the original miners left these pillars to hold the roof up. And this cave is about the size of a church, and it housed about 250 men underground for the Battle of Arras on the 9th of April 1917. Canadians. There's 1,000 items of graffiti on the walls, most of it Canadian soldiers. And this has become a bit of a pilgrimage for Canadians, and we take coach loads of Canadians into this cave. It's not strictly open to the public, but it will feature heavily in the centenary on the 9th of April. And in this cave is this sort of quality of carving. This very beautifully carved picture of this guy's regimental badge, Alicambler. And these are very unusual. These are original carvings from the miners. This is hard to date, but it's most probably 1600, 1620. And these miners are working down in the dark with just a flickering candle, and they must have felt it was fairly spooky. So they put these carvings on the edge, typically on the edge of a pillar where there's room here that they're working on. You can see here he's got a leather helmet, and there's a tiny little candle there on top of his helmet, held on by a bit of clay. And he's saying, my name's Pierre or whatever, this is my cave, I'm digging up the blocks from here, nobody else go in here. Now, with all that flickering candlelight, they're a bit scared. Well, there's perhaps a nicer one of that drawing in better light. Oh, change different subject. I was going to show you a picture of that they show of there's carvings there, little devils and things that they put on the walls. But you'll have to come on a tour, and I'll take you into Maison Blanche, you can see those. But coming back to subways then, the work that we're working on currently at the moment, and Bruce there is much more expert than me on this, but when we go into systems like this subway at Wings Way, which is the Battle of Loos, or Loss as it should be called, we're clearly concerned about the quality of the air and gas. Obviously we take gas monitors in, we get a little bit of carbon monoxide, etc., not at critical levels. The oxygen can get down to about 16%, which I don't like working in. I can't lift a bucket at 16.
We don't work in 16%, David.
Health and safety.
Health and safety.
What will kill you is the roof. So we're looking at the roof continuously, make sure that that's not going to come down. And then we're looking for explosives, which is where Alan comes in. So unlike the work that you may be doing in tunnelling, we've got two things really. One is that there could be explosives around. And two, these guys had to work very quietly, which is perhaps something you don't have to do quite so much. Although you do get close to basements, don't you? And this is a typical roof where it's in not a very good condition. It's trying to get itself into a bell shape, but there are natural faults in the chalk caused by earthquakes 40-odd million years ago, and it does leave it in a pretty perilous state. So we would tend to avoid a roof of that poor quality, and there's plenty of other examples where it's a lot better than that. But this is one where, in a hospital that I found in Arras, called Thompson's Cave, where a chunk the size of a small car has come down. You can see that, therefore, that you don't want that falling on your head. It's all black because that was the kitchen area for the hospital. And as you're wandering around, you do find things like this. This is a German stick grenade that they've left tucked in a pile of rocks. If the British broke through, they would fuse that and fire it down the tunnel. So you have to be careful picking up Mills grenades and German stuff as well. Here's a pile of Mills grenades that we've kicked on the floor and put to one side, and over there's live bullets that in theory won't go off, but you'd never be too sure. Now, how are we doing? So when we got through in the Battle of Loos in 1915, a very bloody battle that basically all we got was from one side of the village to the other. We established a front line with Loos here, and this is the village of Hullock, or Illu. I'm supposed to call it Illu, but that's in French or something like that. And this is our front line, and the German front line. And in military maps, the enemy is always shown in red, and the good guys are in blue. We talk now about blue on blue fire. This is because the French were the first to draw such maps, and therefore they drew the enemy as the redcoats, the British redcoats, which has always therefore been traditionally used for the enemy. So we're the enemy. And we got through Loos, and it's 1917, and we realized that with the Russians capitulating with the October Revolution, the Germans are going to bring 52 divisions across from the Eastern Front to the west and have a final fling before the Americans get in the war. And therefore, what we did on this front is build a subway, but for the first subway, unlike the attacking subways at Vimy Ridge in 17, this is a subway for defence, so we can move troops around this whole area quickly in the event of the Germans actually attacking here. We knew that the attack was coming in the spring of 18. So we want to get into this system because apart from finding explosives, this is a big boys train set, we want to get in. So we had a map of what the system was like. You can see it over shot on a Google map here. We wanted to get in, and so we started doing a recce. Now when you see things like these, you must be able to drive along this road and not even notice these little copses. But these are copses because there's a lot of First World War ordnance in them, unexploded ordnance, and also mine shafts, etc. And the farmer has not managed to get them back under the plough. So we're looking for that. And then from maps, we know that from that little copse, there is this tunnelling system, and we know that there's an entrance. And if you superimpose that on Google, we know it's on that side, on the south side of the copse. So we're looking round now. We know where the entrance to this system is. We've got a map of what it looks like. We've just got to find the actual entrance. So these guys are looking around for the actual entrance. And then from experience, you see things like this, which is rubble on the surface, where it was filled in the 1920s, or 1918 to 1920 odd, with loose rubble. And that, from experience, looks like the top of a shaft, or it could just be a bunker. We'd have to go very quickly here because we broke in over there. We spent about 2 weeks trying to get into the main system, and then all that work we did there collapsed. The bell chamber went right to the surface and collapsed. Got too dangerous, so we hired a digger. We actually smashed our way in on the edge of the field, and then we built this Heath Robinson thing, which is loaded for timbers, 2 of them, one after the other.
That's what you get with surveyors building a tunnel.
And we got this heavy machine here to lower them down into the vertical shaft, one on top of the other. That was Alan there, looking there. This guy's guiding it to make sure it's perfectly vertical. And then we put a hatch on top to stop the locals getting in overnight. And now you can climb down into the system and go underneath. And you can start walking around, which is that moving video that you saw at the start. Now this actual tunnelling system was used in the Second World War. It was prepared in the Second World War as a reserve corps headquarters. Should we pull back? We thought there would be static warfare again in the Second World War. They prepared this as a defensive position if we came back from Belgium. Of course, as it turned out, we were totally overrun in May 1940, never used in practice. So there's Second World War evidence in here. And as you go along, this is the base of a railway system on the ground. All the material's been salvaged. And there's another example of what it looks like. British barbed wire. British barbed wire is 2 thin strands twisted together. German front barbed wire is 1 thick strand. So that's British barbed wire. And then one of the dangers of walking around in the dark is that you can suddenly come across this. This is a vertical well going right down below the water table. So you're looking down into the well. And actually you can climb a set of steps around there and actually get your bucket to get the water out. But obviously it's quite dangerous if it's dark that you could fall down into that. Here's an original photo from this area showing that they'd got floorboards and washing up and various domestic things. And then you get things like this. Now this must come from standard mining practice, presumably. And it's 1 ring for this and 1 ring for that. 2 rings for attack, which perhaps you wouldn't get in a coal mine. And it says here, down at the bottom here, warrant officer so-and-so is in charge of that bell system. Because the tunnel was only wide enough to take one set of wagons going one way and not the other. So you had to have a traffic management system. And alongside that, he's been a bit bored. So he's very carefully drilled this. It's hard to see, but that's a three-dimensional scraping into the chalk. And it's a diagram of a tunnel, except he's got typical French trees outside. So he's saying that a tunnel looks like one of the typical French roadway systems. And then you start getting this sort of thing. Lenny from the Field Company, Royal Engineers, from the Second World War. It says here somewhere, Second World War, 1940. There. The Germans did not attack until May 40 in the Second World War. So he's there preparing for a defensive position. He survived the war. These graffiti has not been seen for 100 years, or in this case 50 years since the... This is the First World War, which is characterised by the purple, which is the standard British Army pencil. And this is of a guy who's been killed from the 1st 6 Knots Battalion, a chap called Wiley, or Hiley, and there's his reference, and he's buried in the nearest cemetery to the workings, at Philosophy British Cemetery. So it's a little bit upsetting to see graffiti that then you find the chap in the local graveyard. This was drawn, a lady, by Jim's something or other, but then somebody's put all this white round and damaged his name. I wouldn't have thought he would have done that himself. And this is very clear. It looks like it's been drawn yesterday. Sergeant Mackey, 1940 again, Royal Engineers. And there's quite a nice picture of a British officer, Royal Engineers officer. And then you get this. This is First World War, and it says here, stick to it, only 3 years more. So they were... In 1917, they weren't sure how long the war was going to carry on. And this says, down, notice to trammers. So the guy in charge of the little tram system is being warned that there's an incline and his trams could run away from him, so he's being warned about that. And I put these in for Bruce, who's Scottish. Camerons, this chap Riley, B Company, First 6 North Stas, he survived the war. But unfortunately, Codlin didn't. And what a lot of these soldiers do, they say how long they've been out, 14, 15, 16, 17. And he survived that long. My great-uncle's division, the 46th Division, British Expeditionary Force. Unfortunately, he was killed about a week or two after he wrote that graffiti. And this one is Second World War again, October 1939. If you just scratch in the chalk, you get the white coming through. This is an attempt at a naughty lady having a shower, which we'll pass on. And this is Gunnar Moorcroft. He's in September 17. But the quality of that, you think it was done yesterday, because it doesn't bleed away. You think with the wetness of the dampness of the chalk, it would bleed away, but it still stays sharp after 100 years. And this says, officer's dugout. So the room there's an officer's dugout. And this one says, walking wounded this way, a blighty wound, a blighty one. Now, a blighty wound is a wound that's bad enough to take you out to the battle, but not bad enough to kill you. Like, say, a bullet through your hand. You couldn't fire a rifle with a bullet through your hand, but there again, it's not going to kill you. So a lot of soldiers hoped for a blighty wound, one that would get them back to Blighty or England. And then this is Black Watch Forever, could be either war. Scotland the Brave. It's another Scotland one. Another Scotland one that's badly damaged by water. And this is a little bit of politics here. Socialism, what's it say? The world's best hope. And then it says here something like, workers of the world unite. It doesn't literally say workers of the world unite, you've nothing to lose but your change. But he does say something very similar there. So a bit of a Jeremy Corbyn fan there. And then we come along, because this is a defensive position, we're actually putting in all sorts of traps and tricks and booby traps and whatever. This is a door that comes across the subway and blocks it, should the Germans be in. And the idea is that it's on a rail that's sloping, and if you let go of this rope, it will slam across and lock into these inlets here, so it will be impossible to get past. And then you've got a firing position that you can fire through it as the Germans are coming up here. And you deliberately don't have any little side rooms or whatever for about 100 yards, so that the Germans have to come up without any means of shelter, up a straight tunnel. And there's the block as we found it. The only one that's ever been found, although they're known about in textbooks, this is the only one that's ever been found. And there's the wheels of it. And that's looking through the sniper's plate, so you can fire down. That from the textbook, we know that there's also about 1,000 pounds worth of explosives put in the floor there, so that in the worst case, you blow that and pull the whole tunnel down. So that explosive is still there under your feet. We may have to have a go at defusing that when we don't like Alan so much. And so that was here-ish, but we're trying to break through here so that we can go right round all this system. And the blue area is a deep system, a fighting tunnel that we'd like to get into. So here's Bruce here, I have Bruce up front, trying to break through a blockage that's occurred. And I'm behind watching the roof all the time to make sure that the roof doesn't come in. And we're deliberately encouraging the loose rubble to come down and clear it away, and then encourage more to come down until it's stable. In the meantime, there's me having a look up, see if any more is coming down. In the meantime, we came back from there. What's intriguing about this original map, here it says old chalk excavation, which means that there's a cave, but it's already underground. It's already 90 feet down, or 30 feet down, and then it says underground there's also a cave, which we're trying to get into through these two little rooms here. We don't know how to get into that. But on the first room, there's this wall of badges that people have drawn, unfortunately somewhat damaged by water, but they're very high quality. Just quickly say that no soldier in 1917, after 3 years of fighting, is going to spend 12 hours or more carving that if his morale's not high. And we've got recorded over 3,000 items of graffiti, 3,000 items. Now, if you're in the corner of a cave and it's dark and you want to stop the war, you could write whatever you liked on that cave wall and nobody would know what you said. 3,000 items of graffiti, not a single one is anti the war. Not a single one is anti the king or the generals. They moan about the sergeant major, they moan about the plum jam. They do not say we must end this war. And a lot of revisionist stuff has been around since the 1970s. But that's a very controversial thing. We talk about it for hours. We're trying to break into this little cave, but unfortunately the roof is extremely dangerous. In fact, the roof is on the floor, largely. So we want to try and break in the back of this room. In the meantime, we wanted to establish a new entrance because we were working, and these grey-haired old boys said that when we were teenagers, we got into the system in this little copse by putting down a whole load of oil drums and then sliding down them, as teenagers will. And so we went back there to try and find that, and we were, now because we're underneath, we're going upwards looking for it there, and we found, this is looking inside one oil drum, and there's the second one, and you could just see a bit of daylight. So the story from these boys was true, and the next job when we go back in a few weeks' time is to try and break out here, so we've got more than one entrance. Sorry I had to rush that bit, but I really wanted to give you time to talk to these two experts here on EOD and tunnel. So thank you very much. And that's our badge, by the way, the Durand Group.
The one thing that just struck me, because the film had been shown about Hullock, tonight coming in, I showed David the War Memorial here, and there's one very famous chap who was killed just on this particular area where we're trying to get to, called the quarries, and he's actually buried in the quarries, is Beau Lyons, the Queen Mother's brother, and he's actually on the War Memorial, so he was a member of the Institute. It's just a connection that's really just struck me tonight. Thanks, Dave.
Right, so very pleased to take any questions. If anybody's got any questions.
Okay, so we'll open questions up to the floor. There's a couple of microphones around, so. Can you just say your name and affiliation when you grab the microphone, please?
Thank you. Hi, I'm Alan Scada from BFK. You mentioned that you do it as volunteers. I mean, what drives you? What's your why do you have a passion for this?
Yeah, my passion started. I was brought up into mining and tunnelling. My father before me, and I actually met the group through my interest in World War I, and I watched a project where the Durand had put a film together with a gas detector going off. There's all sorts of things wrong with this film, and I was making comments, and I was pulled to one side, and somebody said, do you know about tunnels? I told them. Next thing I was with David in Arras, and the one thing I always wanted to do was to break into a tunnel that hadn't been opened and actually get the smell and get to see what it was like. And we've actually been fortunate enough to do that in Vimy. The British tunnels, we didn't tend to timber them. We only timbered up in places that were dangerous because we tried to move very quickly. The Germans always close-boarded. And when you get in, we got into a German tunnel that was close-boarded. It still had the air mechanisms in it. It had all the removal systems. Oh, it was a fantastic, I think we even found an officer's boot in the place. And that was never on the map. To me, that was unique. Also, the graffiti, at first you just photograph it and move on and forget it. And then, like years later, we've done some Canadian filming, and people have actually seen it in Canada, and they've brought their relatives back. Now, when you actually see the relatives to the graffiti and what it means to them, that is the driving thing from now on, is to actually get as many people connected back to that still exists. What about you? Would you get all worked up about?
I got involved basically because it's a very close friend of mine that got killed in one of the tunnels, an accident, and because I'd known him for such a long time and what he did, and then for some reason it came like I went to visit them and see his memorial, and you feel this hand on your neck dragging you in. It's contagious, and it's very humbling as well. I don't think we appreciate what our ancestors did, really. That's where I come from.
Any others?
Clive Winkler, ex-Miller Civil Engineering. Really interesting presentation, thanks very much. There's obviously a huge amount of spoil, which is normally a problem. Was that put to good use during the war?
No, not really. I mean, it was a spoil. The spoil was a problem because the Germans could detect it and therefore know you're mining, and therefore you had all sorts of ruses to hide the spoil, like putting it into existing craters, because they were white anyway, so you basically filled up an existing shell crater or whatever, or put it into the bottom of lakes, all sorts of tricks. But I can't recall any actual positive use of the rubble other than tamping. The farmers put it on the fields to counteract clay to this day, but that's a minor thing, really. No, there's no positive use for it. But chalk is almost an absolutely ideal tunnelling medium because any amateur can do it with a pickaxe and a bit of pipe or something. As long as, generally speaking, you leave a bit of a curve on the roof, it self-supports and is relatively safe. It only tends to be dangerous on fault lines. And also, as you get closer to the surface, the chalk is damaged by shell fire, which is something perhaps you wouldn't tend to find with your tunnel in London, etc. But so the first 10 feet can be extremely broken up with shell fire, and that makes it very unstable. So as a rule of thumb, the first few feet are the most dangerous. As you get lower down, it gets much more safer.
Any other questions?
There's one over here.
To the left.
Hi, Scott O'Neill. Thank you very much for that presentation. I came tonight because I actually saw your guys on the Discovery Channel a few weeks ago. So when I saw this talk, I thought, I'm going to go and see this in person. Your talk was very interesting, and on a number of times you mentioned German tunnels. Do you have an equivalent group in Germany that goes looking for their tunnels, or are you the guys that the world calls upon for this?
No, there is a group down in the Argonne. they're a German led by a very nice guy called Adolf, and we won't hold that against him. And they're really based around Verquois, sort of close to Luxembourg border. And they virtually the equivalent systems that we have from French tunnelling companies. And if you Google Verquois, it was incredible. It was like a mountain village that the Germans and the French got there on the same day, and each held each side of the village. And it's like a volcano. They've taken the top of the mountain. I think it's on like 60 metres of it has just gone. And to this day, they're still working in there. And yeah, they're the equivalent to us. We keep close together, because since Germany got united, there's been a lot of German archive evidence that we've been able to get a hold of, which has helped us to locate a lot more tunnels. And we've worked closely with them. But they don't seem to travel far. They stay down their end.
No, as a rule, you don't see many Germans on battlefields.
No.
Full stop. And when you do, they're Dutch. They're not Germans, they tend to be Dutch. The German government does not maintain their graveyards, but it's a charity that maintains them.
Yeah, that was one of the sad things we did. We one of the tunnel we tried to get access to in Vimy, we came across 2 German bodies, and some of the guys are EOD, some are archaeologists, and the archaeologists amongst them actually did a complete recovery of a body, and it was absolutely fantastic to watch, and we all got to do a bit under supervision. And we recovered this guy, the German sergeant, full uniform, his shoulder tag, everything, but nowhere could we find any ID. And he had his knife and fork and everything. He'd been pretty badly injured, and it was all gathered together, and the authorities, if we were to do that in any of a British site, it would be the Commonwealth War Graves Commission. Well, the German representative turned up, and we all watched him take this body and put it all in bones now, put a tag on it, and we asked, we'd like to come and see him when he's been interned, we'd like to come to the service. He said he just saw it. I said, what's happening to him? So we take him down to Ossuary in Verdun and just sling him over into the Ossuary. And we thought, well, actually, we'd probably been better off to put him over to the side. But the French, when the French gendarme come out, they asked us, do we know nationality? Yeah, he's German. Is he in the way? Yeah, well, just toss him away. I mean, that takes a bit of getting used to. But yeah, we were never invaded, so we probably don't know about that. But yeah, it's yeah.
Any further questions? 2 more.
I was going to say about it. Also, a lot of records got destroyed in Berlin in the Second World War, which related to like the engineers and surveyors of the Germans. So we tend to use a lot of, we've got one guy he lives in the Imperial War Museum, doesn't he, and the records, who's our researcher. So we quite often have to use British information to find out where we think German tunnels are. But there are Germans coming on board, but a lot of the records got destroyed in the Second World War.
So I think there's one at the back, right?
My name's Ian Lee, ex-Bar Hale Construction. I'm retired. I'm an ex-tunneler. Going partially back to the spoil question on the practical side, did the British Army have any specialist plant to help them? And what about hoisting all the spoil up to the surface? And how was it distributed?
There's various hand winches. One of the generic problems they had is they had to be quiet a lot, so they couldn't employ a lot of mechanical stuff unless they knew that there was a bombardment going on, and then they could be a bit noisier. So the very improvisation of winches, etc., nothing really clever. They did try a mechanical boring machine in Belgium, but it lost its way and was last seen heading towards Australia. And got stuck because if you try and bore in clay, as no doubt you know better than I do, it squeezes the machine. And of course they didn't have the sophistication to stop that. And therefore it got stuck and lost its way. Still there to be found, by the way.
Well,
You want a sponsor?
We actually, on the Channel Tunnel, we came across the Whittaker boring machine, which was in the Warren. It was on British Rail land, but we actually got permission to try to recover it, and it was successfully recovered, and it used to stand at Sheraton at the Eurotunnel Exhibition Centre and was turned over every couple of hours. It was given to the Science Museum. It still exists. I think it's in their storage facility. But that was a 1920s machine, so that was like the sister machine, and it was a fantastic looking thing. It had the sort of like a big wing at the back that pushed itself out into the chalk, and the actual cutting head one day jammed and the whole thing twisted round, and they took it out and abandoned it. But that was what they tried to do in Belgium as well. So we were trying motivations and trying to use all the sort of techniques that we could come up with. Tunnel boring machines were never used in the Somme that we're aware of, which would be absolutely perfect for there.
Mm.
Yeah, John Austin from OTB Engineering. I'm actually an ex-sapper, and thanks very much, gentlemen, for the very, very enlightening talk. One can only imagine how hard these guys worked in such stressful conditions.
Indeed.
Did they get extra pay, and what sort of rest periods? Was there rotation with these guys at the face?
Yeah, the British, well, of course, they got off to a bad start because they promised the miners, was it 3 shillings a day, whereas Tommy got a shilling a day or something like that. So they promised them more pay, and of course, then that caused a lot of upset, particularly when there was a very ill-defined boundary between an engineer that's working for the Royal Engineers, who then works with the professional, so-called professional tunnellers coming in, and he's only on a shilling, and the other guys are on 3 shillings, etc., etc. But it must have been really terrible down there with virtually no light and no means really of seriously improving the oxygen. And of course they did take canaries down there and mice in pockets and things like that. But if the Germans were about to attack a trench, then they had no option but to carry on to try and lay a countermine. The morale of troops, they can put up with all sorts of things. They can put up with shell fire and bullets and all sorts of things, but the thought of being blown up from underneath was the worst thing, and it really ruined morale of a lot of regiments. And so the miners had to be seen to do something, and to do it quick.
Also in the Arras area, the New Zealand tunnelling companies, they, as Dave was said, they were quite big lads, and they made some seriously large tunnels. But when they were working alongside the British, they discovered what the British pay was and what the rations were, and suddenly the work rate dropped. And when they were asked what was going on, they actually said that they're working virtually to rule, that they weren't not going to work, but they wanted these guys alongside them to be getting the same conditions, getting the same money and getting the same sort of food. They did rotate quite quickly. The tunnelling companies, obviously these are professional men and they have to be protected. So what would happen after their shift, they go quite far back to areas for rest, and they'd be 8 and 12-hour shifts would be on constantly. They were protected, but even in the front line, you're probably lucky if you had done 5 days in the front line trench. Our system of rotation was extremely good to keep people moving and keep the morale up. But the actual tunnellers themselves, the tunnelling companies, there was 25,000 of them employed, and they were very well protected and looked after. Conditions varied. On the Somme, obviously, it's very dry, and all through where we are, up into Belgium, it's very wet, constant pumping. It's very much like being in London blue clay, and horrible conditions with the pressure coming on in there. So that was really specialist stuff. But they were very well looked after in that point of view, and some of them sort of really enjoyed it, in fact. The fact that it was like if they were in a coal mine up to their knees in water and beyond for their shift, that wasn't happening. And they're getting, we've got to remember we're talking, you know, the conditions in 1914. At home, things weren't very good for food and conditions like that. The miners, you know, no baths or anything. So they were getting well treated, that is one thing.
We were filming with the Canadians, it's on History Channel, and they flew over a coal miner to be their expert on tunnelling, even though we could have told him a lot more than he knew. But anyway, that's what these film crews tend to do. And all this guy could say was, "It's white, it's white, it's white." All his career, he'd been working in coal mines. He'd never seen a white tunnel before. That's all he could say to camera, "It's white." Right.
I think we've got one more down on the right.
Ona Murku from PwC. Just a quick question. You kind of touched upon it in the last answer. Where were these guys from? What was their background? Were they ex-miners? And what countries dug these tunnels?
Yeah. Oh, the tunnels, the start of the tunnelling is a fantastic sort of, well, it's just boys' own stuff. There's a guy, Norton Griffiths. He was a contractor, I believe, and up in sort of Manchester area, he had men digging sewers with a clay kicking technique, which a cross on the back and kicking the face. And he virtually, I think the Germans started the first mine underneath an Indian regiment, and it was very poorly received, and we had to send somebody very quickly, and he virtually took over the MOD and told them he was sending all his men, and I think it's some of the fastest movement of people from civilian into military life. And he was a right renegade. He'd done amazing things. And then it just grew. Once the technique and how these guys operated was seen as something really needed, they actually asked for volunteers within the regiments that had mining regiments, like the Monmouth regiments, the Welsh miners, all around Yorkshire. Really, the word went out and people came. And we do come across quite a lot of Irish graffiti recently. I've seen some Munsters recently down in Hullock and things around there. But yeah, everybody would supply their best men if they could.
There is in Brecon, there is a museum that everybody associates with Rorke's Rift. But if you go in there, there's actually a bit about the Mons Regiment, because they used to have it at Abergavenny Castle, but now it's been moved to Brecon. So if ever in Brecon, it's worth a visit.
Can I, just by way of an advert, invite any of you to come out to Arras and have a look in our tunnels? You're very welcome. You have to sign a disclaimer that you're not going to sue us if you kill yourself, because they are dangerous and they haven't been sanitised for public use.
Well, the one we've got, Dave, is the one coming up.
Yeah, we're going to open up a big system. That system that was on the moving video, we hope to open up to the public next year. In reciprocation, perhaps you could do two things. One, let us have a look at your tunnelling systems, which will be great fun. And two, if you know of any sponsors, because this is expensive work and it's largely paid for out of our own funds, personally. So if anybody knows of a sponsor that would be interested in working with us, and we could have a very unusual corporate away day. Instead of throwing paintballs at each other, you can come down into these tunnels and get closer to real ancient mining.
And the actual, between the 3rd and the 12th of April, it's the 100th anniversary of the Battle of Arras, which the Canadians have actually taken over for the Battle of Vimy. But we will be out there constantly at this Maison Blanche. If you wanted to get in touch with David through all the contacts, anybody that's out there, we will be doing tours, and we would be able to fit anybody in that wanted to, just sort out the dates when we haven't got 30 coaches. Right.
Great opportunity. Was there any final questions? One just down the front here.
John Greenoch. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Very interesting. You've actually partly answered the question, because my question was, today when you clear a tunnel and you get to the ordnance, you evacuate and you leave one soul behind. I was going to ask, are you looking for access to remote control detonation units? But if you haven't got the funds, perhaps you ought to nip down to Chatham and see the Royal Engineers. Sapper John's about, he knows people. But no, I just wondered, is it something you've thought of? Are you explored it, or are the costs against you at the moment?
Well,
Thank you.
We were very lucky. The Royal Engineers did donate a drilling machine to us with a compressor, and we used that quite extensively for about 10 years. Obviously, the chaps who were diffusing these were serving at the time, and we could perhaps have used things, but they make those decisions. We get them access, make it safe, and you would know more about remote detonation.
In a tunnel, no, I want to be controlled, because the last thing you want is force, because we're down there to do with historically archaeology, so really we don't want to create any more damage. So the ideal thing is to diffuse it It is pretty safe, but as David explained, once you got the centrepiece out of it, the rest is like the amarol. If you get it on your fingers or on your nose, your mouth, you know about it. It's like anybody else, is it blueberry or hawksberries? When you put them in your mouth, and you just in forever, you'll taste it forever. It's a horrible stuff. So they're useless. But the reason I pass those things around, a couple of gentlemen I know will know, but that detonator, their detonator, which is plastic explosive, has got 2 grams of explosive in it, content. If I was to hold that in my hand and set it off, it'd probably take it off to my wrist. That's 2 grams. And David explained about, 60,000 pounds of explosive. I'm just going to give you an idea, because I deal with commercial companies quite a lot now, and I try not to go into too much detail technical. I try and bring home to what a small device will do. I showed you a 303 bullet. It's probably, if the French kids are quite into putting them in their dad's vice, getting a nail and hitting it. And generally you'll see a lot of French kids, they've either got scars on their faces or where they've blown their father's little vice up. But they do it to see how far they can send the bullet through all the sheds in the back of the gardens. But we found one in our very first tunnel, and it was as though somebody had just left a box of 303 ammunition. They were you could have thought in a rifle and fired them, but generally where they're crimped, they're quite weak. So if I was to throw that in the fire, it would still do what it was intended to do. We clear things at 100 years old, and it will still do 60% of what it's intended to do. So when you're thinking of thousands of pounds of gunpowder or whatever, it's quite dangerous. But the other piece, the heavy piece, which is more important, that's a piece of frag off a shell. And if you notice, it just seemed to be a bit heavy. We all sort of know how heavy that is, but that's just a bit heavier. And that's what I look for when I'm doing work in London, bits of frag. I've got a piece of frag that I found in London from a bomb that went off. I was going to give you that as a souvenir.
Thanks. Take it over the tube.
Yeah.
Okay, well, can we thank David, Alan and Bruce in the usual way for coming in? Now, that was a really interesting presentation and something quite different for us as a group. And as Alan mentioned, he's got some very interesting pieces that some were getting passed around whilst we spoke. But feel free to go up and have a look, and I'm sure he'll have lots of stories to tell. And equally, in the bar, hopefully afterwards, lots of interesting stories.
Well, I'd just like to say thank you that I can relax. I spent many years sitting out over there listening to what I would classify as old farts, and I've made it. I am an old fart. So I'd just like to say thank you very much for this. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, there was the mention of a bar, was it?
Oh, yeah.
Yes, there will be afterwards. I think, hopefully you've got my slides up there. Yeah, so just a few announcements for things we've got coming up. So on the 10th of March, as most of you know, we've got our annual conference. So bookings now open online. Places are filling up fast, and we've also opened our free student and apprentices places. So if you or anyone you know is interested in taking one of those, then please contact David Brock. And next. And then after the conference, we will be having a social at the Hawthorn Crater in the city. So please come and join us, whether you come to the conference or not. One of our next events is the workshop on the 16th of March, to be announced very shortly, so booking will open soon. And if you have any other suggestions for workshops coming up, then please contact Sam. And then the next BTS evening meeting is on the same day on the Delft train station in the Netherlands, a design for safety, ventilation and air. So again, that's set to be something a bit different to what we normally have. And then our next presentation is on the 6th of April, that will be done by Benoit Jones. The topic to be announced very shortly. And finally, we've got, it's not the BTSYM Annual Dinner, it's the BTS Annual Dinner. that's on the 5th of May. So there's tickets available for that, and BTSYM members can get them half price. We have 2 tables, which is always a great event to attend. So again, if you're interested in coming to get the code to get the half price tickets, please contact David. So thanks very much for coming this evening. If we can do one final thank you to our presenters, and hopefully you'll all join us in the bar afterwards.
Thank you. Thank you. Where's your digs now? Where are you staying?
Elephant.